Lesson 8, stand out. Someone has to. It is easy to follow along. It can feel strange to do or say something different. But without that unease, there is no freedom. Remember Rosa Parks. The moment you set an example, the spell of the status quo is broken and others will follow. After the Second World War, Europeans, Americans, and others created myths of righteous resistance to Hitler. In the 1930s, however, the dominant attitudes had been accommodation and admiration. By 1940, most Europeans had made their peace with the seemingly irresistible power of Nazi Germany. Influential Americans such as Charles Lindbergh opposed war with the Nazis under the slogan, America First. That's notable and not a coincidence that Trump's regime has used the America First slogan. They've been using a lot of this Nazi era language today. America First comes from Nazi sympathizer rhetoric. Like they just gave him that fake award, the America First award. That's tied to this, but I digress. It is those who were considered exceptional, eccentric, or even insane in their own time. Those who did not change when the world around them did, whom we remember and admire today. And so this goes into, right, again, we're talking about standing out, right? Like when it's, when everyone's saying the same stuff, or, when it's easier to fall in line, stand out, right? Great examples here. In March 1938, none of the great powers offered any resistance as Germany annexed Austria. In September 1938, the great powers, France, Italy, and Great Britain, then led by Neville Chamberlain, actually cooperated with Nazi Germany in the partition of Czechoslovakia. In summer 1939, the Soviet Union allied with Nazi Germany, and the Red Army joined the Wehrmacht in the invasion of Poland. The Polish government chose to fight, activating agreements that brought Great Britain and France into the war. Germany, supplied with food and fuel by the Soviet Union, invaded and quickly occupied Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and even France in the spring of 1940. The remainder of the British Expeditionary Force was evacuated from the continent at Dunkirk in late May and early June 1940. And I felt like those details, it was important to capture all of those because the person who stood out at that time was Winston Churchill. He became the prime minister in 1940, and Great Britain was alone. The British had won no meaningful battles and had no important allies. They had entered the war to support Poland, a cause that seemed lost, and Nazi Germany and its Soviet ally dominated the continent. And so things were looking dismal, and the US was refusing to get into the war, but Churchill stood his ground. Actually, Hitler had expected Churchill to come to terms after the fall of France, but Churchill didn't do that. He told the French that whatever you may do, we shall fight on forever and ever and ever. In June 1940, Churchill told the British Parliament that the Battle of Britain is about to begin, and the Germans began bombing British cities, and Hitler figured that this would force Churchill to sign an armistice, but obviously he was mistaken. Churchill later called the air campaign a time when it was equally good to live or die, and he spoke of the buoyant and imperturbable temper of the of Britain, which he had the honor to express. And so it was in this moment that Churchill had the opportunity to define the British people as a proud people who would calmly resist evil. Other politicians would have found support in British public opinion to end the war. Churchill instead resisted, inspired, and won. The Royal Air Force held back the Luftwaffe, Without control of the air, even Hitler could not imagine an amphibious invasion of Great Britain. Churchill did what others had not done. Rather than concede in advance, he forced Hitler to change his plans. And so, again, the whole point of this story, and a few other examples, including kind of, average citizens doing this, when they formed the Jewish ghettos, people who were outside of the ghettos sneaking in to provide them kind of food, resources, medicine, things like that. Used this example of Therese Prekrau, who actually helped a family escape from a particular ghetto that ended up becoming sort of a death sentence. They went to one of the death chambers, and everybody who was there ended up dying. And she saved an entire family from that fate. And so the whole point here is, when it's easier to fall in line, or when you don't want to draw attention to yourself, standing out is really important if you have the means to do so. You can either do it, hopefully we have representatives like Churchill who will be a source of inspiration and power and resistance, right? But you also, maybe if you can fly under the radar, and through your actions in the bigger picture, that's how you stand out, is by doing what nobody else will do, even if that doesn't necessarily become front page news every day. So stand out.